Hello, everyone. We are the Convents and Scuole team, and our project is cataloging the convents and Scuole of Venice and the Lagoon. There's going to be two parts to this presentation, one that covers the convents of Venice and one that covers the Scuole of Venice. My name is Thomas Gilbert. I'm a computer science major.
I'm Maggie Joyce. I'm an environmental engineering major.
I'm Caroline White. I'm a civil engineering major.
And I'm Sophia Wong, and I'm a mechanical engineering major. Moving forward with the background of our project, there were two previous research teams that covered convents and scuole. In 2003, the convents team addressed the building address as well as the building usage. In 2006, the scuole team plotted the approximate locations of all the buildings of the scuole. This gap in information between the convents and scuole is also existing in the public online space, with convents having a lot more historical documentation about them. However, the scuole do have a book by Gaston Vio that covers all 925 scuole in Venice.
Based on this previous data that we had on the Convents and Scuole of Venice, we had two main project objectives. The first being to visit the buildings that we could and figure out what they were used for today, and the second being filling the gap that is there in the information on the historic Convents and Scuole of Venice. So for our first objective, we were able to complete it through an app called Survey 123, which allows us to collect photo and text data about the buildings of the convents and scuole. You can see on the right a list of all the information we collected for each building, including photos of any signage that indicated the use of the building and text such as the name and address of the building.
And a quick summary of our fieldwork. So in total, we visited 129 buildings in Venice. So we visited 63 scuola buildings, and those can be seen in this map in red. And we also visited 66 convent buildings, and that can be seen in this map in blue.
So now getting into the convents portion of the presentation. For a little background, during the era of the Doge, which is when the convents were most relevant in Venice, there was about 3,000 monks and nuns total living in Venice, which for some context is about 6% of the current population. But the convents were most socially significant when they were joined by young patrician women, daughters of the patriciate, who were wealthy, noble women, who were unable to find a suitable husband. So in order to protect their family's reputation, they would join a convent. But because they were joining these convents out of necessity and not out of interest in godly devotional life, there was a lot of disobedience within the convents. As you can see here in this painting, these are some nuns performing for lay people at Convento di San Zaccaria. And this was quite common practice. They would sing opera and do theatrical plays for people of the streets. And this was the main source of entertainment for the city, as Venice did not have a state-sponsored theater guild at the time.
Moving on to some of our project work, we were given 5 different historical maps to document the convents. We were provided these maps by our sponsor, Dr. Fabio Carrera. These maps range from the 1500s to 1696. Here you can see an example of a map by Giovanni Mario, and it documents 48 convents in the lagoon in Venice, and then here are our 4 remaining maps. You can see that there is a difference in the number of convents. This is largely due to the scale and detail of each map. However, it should be noted that there is some convents that do not exist in the earlier maps that later became established as time went on.
And another part of our research went into the nuns and monks in the convents. So given that convento in Italian, that's a gender-neutral term, we wanted to find out which convents house nuns and which house monks. So as you can see in this map here, the convents in red house the nuns and the convents in green house the monks. And getting into the numbers, this pie chart here shows that it was pretty evenly split, with 28 convents housing nuns and 30 housing monks.
We also did research into the orders of the convents. Essentially, there's many different ways that you can be a monk or a nun and practice Christianity, and the different rules that you follow dictates what order or branch you are in. So these are all of the branches mapped that we found. And according to this graph, the most common were Benedictine or Franciscan. though we were unable to find information on 11 of the convents. All of this research was done in support of our sponsor, the Venice Project Center, who aims to catalog data on all of the art, architecture, and culture of the city of Venice.
Circling back to our field work, you can see this map that we have of the 59 convent buildings that we were able to visit, and we did this based on the address information that the 2006 research team collected on the buildings.
We were also able to map 7 additional convents. We used Google Maps and the distinctive square shape of the cloister, which is the courtyard in the center of the convent, to find these buildings on the islands of the lagoon. So this brought our total to 66 convents studied within our project.
All right, and now getting more into our findings. So these two charts here are donut charts representing the convent building usage categories. So on the left is the usages of the convent buildings from the past research team in 2003, and on the right is our research from 2025. And as you can see, there's been a lot of change in usage of these buildings over the past 20 years. So, for example, in 2003, there were 8 convents being used as residential housing, and in 2025, there are now 2. And trends can better be seen in this slope graph here, with a decrease in religious convent usage and residential housing usage, and an increase in more tourism usage, such as hotels and museums.
Adding on to what Thomas said about the tourism usages, we saw that tourism usages more than tripled from 2003 to 2025, with 2003 having 7% of the buildings being used for tourism purposes, while we had a big jump to 24% in 2025.
Moving on to the Scuole section of our presentation, firstly I'll get into a little background about the 2 main types of Scuole, starting with the Scuole Grandi, which are very large, wealthy, and powerful organizations that any citizen of Venice can join. In the Renaissance era, there were 7, and now there are 4 active. They were known for their grandiose buildings and artwork, as well as their large charitable works, whereas the Scuole Piccole, the Scuole that we studied in our project, are much smaller and less wealthy organizations. In total, there were 925 active in the Renaissance era, and many of the Scuole had criteria for their members. Not anyone could join them. There were 3 different types of Scuole Piccole, starting with the Guild Scuole. These ones had trades associated with them, and all the members of the Scuole practiced this trade for their occupation, and often they were named after the patron saint of this trade as well. There were some Scuole that were purely joined for religious devotional reasons. These ones acted more as a religious and social club where you would go to pray and commit charitable acts with other people. And lastly, there were Scuole that were dedicated to people of a certain nationality, such as the Scuole dei Greci, which allowed the people of this nationality to preserve their heritage and culture.
So in the book that Sophia mentioned earlier by Gaston Vio, there was a total of 203 trades associated with the Guild Scuole, and we were able to translate all 203 using online applications and also the help of Professor Pia Santini, a colleague of our sponsor, Dr. Fabio Carrera. Some of the interesting ones that we found were the Varoteri, which were fur workers who only worked with the fur of this specific Italian squirrel, and Garzotti, which were people who carded wool to make wool fibers.
Moving on to the mapping that we've done for the Scuole, we decided to map out all the churches that were associated with Scuole. This is because oftentimes if the Scuole didn't have a building associated to it or a specific meeting location, they would oftentimes meet in the church or a church room, and it acted almost as a clubhouse. Here in our density chart here, you can see the amount of Scuole associated with each church. We had a maximum of 18 Scuole associated to a single church. Specifically, for example, Chiesa di San Bartolomeo di Rialto had 18 Scuole associated with it.
And another part of this Gaston Vio book that was previously mentioned includes approximate addresses of Scuole. So an approximate address would be considered a place such as a courtyard where these organizations would meet. So we decided to map all 133 listed in the Vio book, so they can be seen here and with these red pins. And another part of the book talks about the Scuole with precise addresses and precise buildings that these organizations met in. So these are the buildings specifically that we conducted our fieldwork on, and you can see them here in red. We mapped 63 total.
So this is the data that we collected from our fieldwork. As you can see in this donut chart, the top 2 uses for Scuole buildings today were businesses or residential housing. Some of the businesses we found were more catered towards residents, such as laundromats or local law firms, and some were more catered towards tourists, such as souvenir shops or luggage storage locations. Unfortunately, as Sophia mentioned earlier, the 2006 student research team did not record the building usage of the Scuole, so we were unable to conduct a longitudinal study as we did with the convents over 20 years.
You can see in this map here the total of 12 Scuole buildings that we found that were used for tourism purposes currently. There's a total of 5 museums, 2 hotels, and 5 tourist businesses. And you can see in this donut chart here that overall 22% of the Scuole buildings were determined to be used for tourism purposes. This aligns very closely with the 24% of convent buildings that we found to be used for tourism purposes, and this does support our hypothesis that over the last 20 years, these religious buildings as a whole have increased in their contributions towards tourism.
All right, now getting into our published data and how we are going to disseminate it to the public. So our team drafted 2 applications, one for the Convents of Venice on the left and one for the Scuole of Venice on the right. These applications are in the form of an interactive website meant for users that are not already experts on these 2 topics. So we drafted these 2 applications in the hopes that our sponsor, the Venice Project Center, will input all of our data and implement interactive features so it's functional for the public. So an example of an interactive feature that we drafted was, for example, in the Convents application, the 2025 Uses Convents Explorer. In this feature, users would be able to click on any usage category such as museum or library, and it would bring up a list of all the convents being used for this purpose as of 2025. And similar for the Scuole application, the user could click on, well, the feature is considered a Scuole trade feature. So with this, a user could click on any trade, such as crown makers or dormouse fur workers, and it would bring up all the Scuole that were associated with that specific trade.
To ensure that our project has longevity, all of our information is stored in our repository. This is so that it can be used by future student researchers as well as the VPC and Serendipity as well. This houses all the information from our project. That includes our story maps, Venipedia links, as well as all the fieldwork data that we have collected as of this far. And that's just to ensure that all the work we've done and everything we've pushed forward to can be saved for the future. And with that, grazie.
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions.
Could you guys just define what you mean by tourism purposes?
So for tourism purposes, we considered any tourist housing such as hotels, and we also considered tourist attractions like museums. We understand that museums can also be considered to enrich the art and culture of Venice, but we believe that these also serve as attractions that make people want to visit Venice. And we also considered tourism-related businesses such as, like I mentioned, souvenir shops and luggage storage locations as being tourist-based. And this was consistent across both the collection of our Convents data and our Scuole data.
So I heard you had some interesting interactions trying to get in to see some of the convents, and I'm wondering if you'd like to share any of that with the audience.
Yeah, so one interaction we had, me and Sophia specifically, we went to this convent where we were met by a nun that spoke no English. So basically, she went and got another nun, and she let us in, and she also didn't speak any English. And this convent was also student housing, like for students studying abroad, I believe. So that nun went and got a student that spoke English, and then she basically just gave us a whole tour around the whole convent and was translating for us, and it was awesome, actually.
Girolamo.
I think one that's probably less heartwarming is when Thomas and I went into a prison and then immediately got yelled at by a security guard for going into the prison.
Sophia and I also visited a military base, and we talked to the guy at the gate, and he said that it was a military base, and we said, oh, are we allowed to come in and take pictures? And he said, sure, go right ahead, and that was great. We explored the whole naval base, so.
Another question? We also went to the convent of the Armeni. Yeah,
Yes.
there's a
We went
mummy
to
in it.
Convento di San Lazzaro, the Armenian convent, which was very interesting. They had a museum there. They had a mummy. We were surprised about that. We also last week went to Convento di San Francesco del Deserto, and we got to meet Fra Franco with the advisors, a monk, and he took us all around the island.
Thank you.
Thank you.